Welcome back to The Road Forward, the podcast for trucking industry leaders, brought to you by TruckSpy, the all-in-one fleet management platform built to empower your drivers to be compliant, productive, and safe. My name's Alex, and we got a great episode today. We got a couple of articles we want to talk about. And here we have Matt. How are you today, sir?
What's going on, Alex? I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. That's good to hear. And we also have Flint. How are you, sir?
I'm living the dream, Alex. What else would you expect?
It's going to be his tagline soon.
Right. I know.
Living the dream.
He's
and if I wasn't, I'm sure not going to tell you that I'm not, right? So.
There you go. Yeah. You mentioned that several times on the pod, living the dream. That's good. But I want to kick it off. Okay. And this is, it's one of those things. I obviously consume a lot of content, watch a lot of videos, and one of the channels that I watch is called Freethink, really interesting channel. And one of the videos that I saw on that channel is about this carbon capture device, okay? And this device is, okay, and I pulled up an article. It's on Fast Company. This new device captures CO2 from trucks as they drive, okay? And essentially, what it is, it's like a bunch of really smart students from, I believe, Michigan, from a university in Michigan. They created this device that like attaches to the back of your truck. Okay. And it's a big device. Okay. To give you an idea, weighs about 5,000 pounds. They're custom making everything, and it captures 80% of the CO2. The problem is that big thing is essentially just tanks. And so when the CO2 gets captured, it puts it into the tank, and you have to empty the tank every 600 miles or so. Now, unlike an electric truck, right? Hold on, guys.
Can we cut to how ridiculous this thing must look? Please cut to an image and post-production. Yes. Bam.
Right.
How ridiculous this stupid thing. I'm sorry. This thing must look.
All right. So all right, Alex, let me understand. So I've got a mechanical engineering degree, okay, and I want to understand how the hell this works. Okay. So I'm driving down the road. I'm producing CO2. First, let's ignore this whole, we actually create additional CO2 and drag by carrying around an extra 5,000 pounds behind us. We'll ignore that fact for a moment. But I'm producing this CO2, and then what's actually happening? Because so if they're putting it in a tank, right, CO2 is like obviously it's a gas. It's a very light gas. It has to be compressed, right? So are they like running a compressor to compress the CO2 on board?
Okay. Excellent questions, Flint. See, this is I like this.
Because compression is very energy intensive, right? Okay. It takes a lot of energy to compress.
We don't think about CO2 critically. It's not to be
so
thought
we're actually
of critically.
Creating more CO2 to compress CO2?
No. All you need is to just capture CO2 and you're good. You're a good person. CO2 is now somehow bad.
Okay, listen.
You sent a link.
No matter what, CO2 is bad.
Okay, hold on. So first of all, I sent it to you so you could take a look at it. But essentially, and I'll put this on the screen, but essentially it's like these 3 tanks that go right behind your cab, and how it works, to my understanding, okay, I'm not an engineer. I have no idea, but the videos that I watch, they explain essentially there's these beads that they're like tiny little golf balls, essentially, that have dimples in them. And those dimples are the perfect size to capture CO2. Okay. And so these beads capture all the CO2. The other air molecules, whether it's oxygen or nitrogen, they can't fit into those beads because they're too big or too small, and they flow right past it. But essentially what happens is it captures it, fills up now when those beads get full, it then heats up with the same exhaust that you were using. It then heats up that CO2 to pressurize it and then puts it into the tank. So it's actually a pretty smart system. And
so
like
it's
the
a
students,
filter media, yeah. So they're not compressing
essentially
it. It's a media.
Right. It's the media captures it, and then they use the same exhaust to then heat it back up to pressurize it and put it into the tank. So it seems like a legitimately good solution. My problem is, okay, and you guys are jumping in early, and I appreciate the initiative, but my problem is, but no, hold on, let me explain another benefit really quick. I'm like, this is like a pitch deck, and I'm always pitching but my main concern is that you now have to convince 2 parties to install this. you have to convince all of the truck stops to install the deposit tank, because after 600 miles, your truck will just release the CO2 like normal because your tank will be full, right? So it's not like an EV where you have to like just shut down and park and charge for 4, 5, 6 hours, but you can still drive. But until you find a tank to deposit that CO2 that you captured, there's really like nothing you can do. It's just going to sit in those tanks. The other issue, so you have to convince two parties, the truck drivers and the truck stops. But the incentive they're giving to the truck drivers is that they will then go sell the CO2 and they will share the revenue from the CO2 that they sell. So concrete apparently needs a lot of CO2. And so they will sell that to like concrete manufacturers or whatever the case may be. And then they'll do some of the revenue share with the trucking companies that install this. And what they said is about 3.5 years after installing this device, you'll make your money back. Open for comment.
Photo on this website. I mean, I love the innovation. All right. I am all about innovation. I'm all about engineers trying crazy stuff and getting it to work. I definitely hear what you're saying. I'm looking at the photo on their website. This is a contraption, guys. There's about 10 miles of cabling in this thing, and control boxes everywhere, and plumbing hanging down by the roadway. I'm looking at this as if I'm a mechanic, and oh my goodness, I don't want to. I mean, you know, when you put an APU on a truck, when I had a trucking company, right, we put APUs on.
Right.
Those things are like pretty simple. It's like a little small diesel engine, an air conditioning compressor, a little generator, and they were broken all the time.
Right.
Constantly.
Yeah. I had a semi truck too, and mine wasn't working. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Right. APUs are a disaster.
It never worked. And so I'm just looking at this thing like, oh my goodness, how are you going to keep that thing working?
Right. Now, the benefit, of course, is if it stops working or if it's full, you can just run your truck like normal and release the CO2 as normal.
Right.
However, the problem is it is still 5,000 pounds. At the end of the day, it's 5,000 pounds. And, you know, I mean, that's precious weight. You know, drive-ins, what can they scale? 42, 45 maybe. And so it's like now that drops you down to under 40. So that might limit your capacity. So really, I mean, obviously it's not going to be for the heavy haulers, but it's going to be, you know, if you're working, you're transporting lightweight drive-in materials, this might be a good idea. But it's just, I agree. From a technical perspective, it seemed really, really cool. But the fact
I would love to go see it. If they want to invite me to Michigan, I will hop a flight and I will be there. I would love to see this thing in person. Right now, from the website, I'm a little scared if I'm a trucking company. But this is the kind of thing, right, that you like prototype and you try and you improve, and it takes many years to get to something that works really well.
Right. And they outlined a good couple of issues, which is like, it's funny because it's the same point that they outlined, which is who's going to build out all this electric charging infrastructure is the same thing that also seems like would hinder them. Who's going to build out all this infrastructure for CO2 deposit tanks? Like then you have to pump your diesel and then you have to pull up to the CO2 tank to release it. Because after 600 miles, the tank on your truck is full and it no longer captures it. So every 600 miles, you have to stop and unfill the tanks that you have on board. And so it's like, it is an interesting thing. It does seem like a really cool engineering thing that they're doing. But it does seem like they have some challenges ahead. And I mean, they raised a good bit of money. They have like deals with the Ryder and a bunch of companies like that they're going to start implementing on. So it's going to be really interesting. You know, at the end of the day, the trucking industry, like I think our quote for this podcast is the trucking industry is changing really quickly. You don't have to go through these changes alone. That's what we're here for. So Matt, I know you are obviously a California resident and you love this conversation about CO2. Alex,
anything that touches on this whole idea of CO2 bad, climate change. I mean, if you really dig into it, it's pretty fascinating stuff. I mean, what happens when I exhale? I mean, the whole premise to me, I'm going to challenge the entire premise. When I exhale, what do I emit? CO2. So, I mean, it's kind of like the premise is that anything emitting CO2 is bad. Or am I eventually going to put a tank up to my back?
Yes.
When
you're
going
to be
around?
A scuba diver, but reverse. They're going to capture.
CO2 is, to me, it's like it's just getting way out of hand how dangerous this is. I understand the CO2 emissions are up, but how much
Right.
does that really impact things globally over,
Right.
the
Yeah, but
course
how
of
much
time?
CO2? I mean, yeah, and who are like the big contributors to CO2, right? I mean, probably factories and plants, which that's actually pretty easy to capture, right? Airplanes, huge emitter of CO2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know like where trucks fall on the scale. I would love to see
I
that.
I think
To see
I
that
think it says 5%. I think on their website it says trucks account
Okay,
for
so
5%
it's
of all the CO2. So it's substantial for how you could say
it's
for maybe small
substantial,
the
but
for how small the industry is. And that's also why Elon Musk talks about it. Like the reason is because a very small amount of vehicles account for a huge amount of CO2. So that's why they're focused
yeah,
on the semi as well. So, but it just goes to show you that there isn't a one solution that will solve all of the CO2 problems. There just isn't. It might be a combination of solutions. It might be this thing. If you have a 1999 long nose Kenworth and you want to go make a delivery in California and they require you to put this on your truck, maybe you go do it to keep your nice long nose Peterbilt or Kenworth, right? But if you have an electric truck, then you'll be allowed there fine. But the issue still remains that there isn't a one and done solution. And this is great when really smart people get together, especially if they're in universities. I think this is in the University of Michigan or something. A bunch of engineers get together and really tackle, put their heads together and have really creative solutions. But that doesn't mean they won't have issues or challenges ahead. And speaking of issues or challenges, Matt, I think you want to talk about this. What did you see? Something about platooning.
Yeah, it was interesting, like staying on the autonomous vehicle vibe here. I read this in a website called landline.media. The title of the article is 5 States Pursue Rule Changes to Accommodate Truck Tuning. So I think the 5 states, they're just highlighting these 5 states and some changes, some updates that they're making, perhaps inching us a little closer to different levels of autonomy. So a couple states here approving, so some platooning, right, for multiple vehicles. Most of the states would require a driver in each vehicle that's involved in the platooning. However, Mississippi, one of the bills that they've introduced would actually allow for the vehicle in the platoon to not have a human driver. So I thought that was interesting, but I think ultimately the way this is going to play out, my view is that these technologies that are being developed for autonomous vehicles will help drivers out in the near term. And I'm talking about the next couple decades. So, it'd be great if you weren't always actively required to be, maneuvering the vehicle, right? If you're in a platoon, right, that's your time where mentally you can maybe take a little bit of a break. The vehicle is doing the work for you, but you still need to have somebody piloting that vehicle, somebody responsible for it. And ultimately, it's going to have to break off from the platoon. But I just think these technologies are going to help drivers out. And that idea of a driver is just going to continue to evolve, right? It's going to be kind of like a mobile manager of the vehicle, of a platoon, So that I think it's really interesting what's happening. And it's great that states are starting to embrace it. Of course, we want that to be very incremental, so as not to introduce any unsafe things happening here.
Right, and it just goes to show you that even though technology might be super advanced, super good, if legislation has to come in there, update, like there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of laws on the books for every single state, and many of them have following distance laws and all these things. And it's like when your uphill battle is making sure that the politicians are getting on board and changing, it takes a long time. So that's not to say that if you're looking at a trucking career, go do it, right? Just keep in mind that your job as a truck driver seems like it will be evolving, right? You'll be managing trucks instead of physically driving the truck and doing every single mile. It seems like you'll be managing, 2 trucks at a time to start. But it is going to be interesting to see.
I'll tell you right now, I'd rather be the driver in the front of the platoon than the one behind. Again, as a big following distance proponent, advocate of all those best practices, I just couldn't possibly see myself being just right up against the rear end of that vehicle in front and just being like, okay, time to have a soda and relax. So I don't see myself being able to do that. But
I think Mythbusters did it like way back when, and they checked how close you have to be to experience a significant impact in MPG, and it was like 10 feet. 10 feet.
Yeah, it's really
so
close.
Your one semi truck has to be 10 feet away from the next semi truck in front of you, going 60, 65 miles an hour. It's terrifying. Flint, what are your thoughts?
That'd be white knuckle for sure.
Look, I think it's cool. You know, I think as we see this autonomous vehicle thing develop, that's probably one of the easiest beachheads is this platooning idea. You know, I think about this in a little bit of a different direction though. Like, you know, technology is cool. I think as this kind of stuff develops, whether it's this or even like ADAS systems and, you know, I'm going to talk about ELDs, right, which is now like kind of old tech. But I think drivers have really got to focus on adapting and learning and embracing some of this technology. I mean, you know, I think drivers just like naturally don't like technology. And as this market changes, I think that there's a really big opportunity for drivers who say, I'm going to learn this platooning truck thing and I'm going to be really good at it and I'm going to manage this vehicle. I think that there's actually like an interesting case here for, you know, we always talk about driver pay, a driver to differentiate themselves in the market by,
Interesting.
I mean, you don't have to be a developer, but just being the guy that's like, you know, I'll figure this stuff out. Right.
Right. So like an open-minded perspective, right? If drivers had an open-minded perspective, but I mean, you know, like comes back to like the average age of a truck driver is like in the 40s or something like that. If I remember correctly, I'll put it on the screen, but so
it was higher.
Even higher. I think I remember it was either in the 40s, or early 50s, something like that. So and it comes back to the whole question of, like, how do we attract the younger drivers, right? It's like in order for drivers to be open-minded to this technology and, you know, possibly stand out, it's going to have to come from the younger people. And it's like, how do we attract those younger people? I don't know. It seems like the big companies don't know either, you know, because it seems like that's they're all trying to solve. But that's more or less.
There's like a reason, right? There's a reason that I want to go out and be a driver. It's because I perhaps don't want to sit behind a desk and have to interface with technology.
Yeah, but my only pushback to that is like, I mean, it doesn't take a whole ton of effort to, you know, start making money online. And I know the whole make money online thing is kind of a joke at this point, but it's like, I mean, honestly, you could start some kind of, you know, TikTok or YouTube channel or, I mean, Instagram Reels. Like, you start uploading some content and it seems like you could make 50 grand. If the average trucker pay, like we discussed last week, was 50,000 and some change, it's like, that doesn't seem too difficult to make online at this point. So that's more or less regardless, that's more or less like the future problems. You know, these are probably some things big companies are thinking about. I want to talk about, you know, essentially, or Flint, I want to go to you. I think you want to talk about something that's happening right now, some current events.
While we're on technology, right? So I saw this week FMCSA revoked 2 ELDs, ELD 1 and nationwide. I think that this is interesting. Like, traditionally, FMCSA has not been very good at revoking ELDs.
Okay.
You know, we have an ELD registered, and I think we do a good job, right, of maintaining that and making sure that it works per their guidelines. Right. I don't really know what to make of this news. Like, either FMCSA is becoming a little bit more aggressive in their enforcement of these ELD self-certification rules, right? Because the way this works is, as an ELD provider, you basically sign some documents and thoroughly test your technology and self-certify that it works. And then FMCSA monitors that as they enforce the ELD mandate, right? They're looking at your technology when they stop a truck to say, well, did the technology give us what we needed? And, you know, did it meet all the requirements, right? And so I don't know what to make of this, right? Is FMCSA being more picky? Or are there some ELD providers that are just doing a really bad job at maintaining their tech and building their tech and making sure that it works? I will say, as a technology provider, it's pretty, like, one, the rules aren't that clear. There's some contradictions in the rules that FMCSA has. I can understand how some of these things don't work. But here's the thing, right? As a provider, if they tell you that they think you're not in compliance, you have 60 days to communicate with them and get in compliance, right? So like sometimes, and we haven't had this happen, but I think sometimes like they can flag you by mistake, right? And you have to talk to them like, well, the carrier like didn't install, like he only had half the ELD installed, right? Like this isn't a technology issue as much as it is a user issue. So I think it's really interesting. What it does do is it leaves trucking companies in a really bad spot if you've invested in technology, and then all of a sudden what you've invested in gets revoked. And this has happened before, right? ELD companies have gone out of business. There's way too many registered. It's like there's more providers than can possibly make a living in this space.
And
so
and that was going to be my first question, like how challenging, right? Since you've done it, since we offer ELD now, so like how challenging is it to get a certification? I think you briefly explained that essentially you do self-certify, but some of the criteria can be, gray area, wishy-washy, and
getting the certification isn't the problem. Getting the certification is the easy part. Building the technology that meets the requirements is the hard part, and making sure that it works. And what we found works really well is you just have to like be communicating with your drivers that are using it. And as they encounter weird stuff, right? Because it's one thing for developers to test it, and like we can do all kinds of tests on technology. And I think anybody that builds technology can. You gotta account for all the real world factors that go into this, right? And so that I think is probably the most difficult part.
Right. But and it's interesting because like even though the ELD got revoked, the carriers, it's not like their service stops, right? Like they're just going to have to be forced to switch eventually, or
they just have to switch providers. They normally give them 60 days. Yeah. So anyway, it's kind of a pain for the truck.
Right. Regardless, right. You've been paying all this money for an ELD, and all of a sudden, hey, sorry, you can't use this product anymore. You're put on short notice. You got to start shopping, looking for something else. Matt, any opinions on ELDs getting revoked, on this affecting, possibly, who knows how many fleets each ELD has, but this affecting fleets on the road?
Well, it just sounds like, from talking to Flint, who built, our ELD, it's easy to kind of get certified. It's easy to make one, easy to build one. It's hard to make it not suck, right? So, I mean, ultimately, you need something that works for drivers in the real world, and that's where the nuances of it really come into play. So,
right, and
there's just a lot of real world factors, right? There's like, well, do you have cell phone signal? Have you installed it correctly? Like, there's a lot of stuff that's not really the developers in the developers' control, right? That come into play.
And do different makes and models have an effect on how it works?
Oh yeah, trucks have a huge effect. Trucks have I mean, because you're reading data from the ECM. So if the ECM's no good, right? If the ECM's old, like if you look at the 2000, in our experience, like 2006 through 2008 model trucks are really bad because they started to put emissions equipment on those trucks, but they were still running a 250 baud rate CAN bus, which is a slow CAN bus, so it can't it's just trying to send too much information through a very narrow pipe. And so like there's a huge, this is what I mean by real world factors, right?
Right.
Like
it's
hard to handle. And then you always have these guys, these trucks that are like, well, we've changed the engine. It was a 2005 and we threw an engine in from 1999, but it still has the ECM from 2005. And you're like, guys, I mean,
right. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you're watching this and you're thinking about starting an ELD, keep these things in mind. Or alternatively, if you're a driver, owner, and operator, and you are in a truck that had a ELD revoked, leave a comment down below. Like, talk to us. How did the process in your fleet go switching through, or switching providers, switching ELD providers? I'd be very curious to see, because obviously this is sometimes the benefit of going with like the big name brands. You know what I mean? Like you're probably certain that when you're going with one of the bigger ones, they're probably not going to get revoked, you know? And,
they might not get revoked, but they also might not work that well either. Right? That's the thing. Like,
right.
I just said it's super important that you have an open communication line and that your provider is like taking your feedback and acting on it. And I think you lose that with the really big guys.
Right. With the big guys, for sure. Sometimes you try to, hey, I have this issue, they put you in a queue and they take an extended period to respond. Yeah. Or also oftentimes what some of the bigger ELDs do is they just limit your features. I know what ELD I was using, like they allowed for no personal conveyance at all. They allowed for no personal conveyance. So if you accidentally drove and you forgot to log it as personal conveyance, you couldn't like switch it afterwards to personal conveyance. So it seems like, there's companies are navigating these waters differently. But that leads us to the end of the show, guys. I appreciate you stopping by. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much, Flint. Leave a comment down below. What do you think about this episode? And we will see you next week. Thank you.